video, we're going to talk about the basics of creating an adventure. So creating an immersive project doesn't come from a single person, but from a collaboration. So each artist has a different role to play during the life of the project. So the writer's role is to make the links between the story and the location and to ease people into the fantasy, to bring the characters to life. The artist or performer is looking to make the fiction a reality, to merge that fantasy in, whether it be, as I said, a visual artist doing visual artwork, or whether it's a theatre performer or circus performer or musician. The narrator gives voice to the stories and tone and drama. The narration also makes it accessible to the visually impaired, and even if you're not visually impaired, it allows people to use their mind's eye and look around so that they don't have to look at the screen to read text. Then you have a musician who builds atmosphere and creates mood and brings to life the soundscape with sound effects and instruments that really give an atmosphere to a piece. If you're creating a project for a specific location, here are a couple of questions that you should consider to help make the immersion of the experience more complete. So, what is it about the location that sets the scene? Is it a atmosphere? Is it a piece of artwork? Is it the architecture? What is it about that place that lends itself to this type of story or this type of genre? And then you have what might happen to bring attention in the story to this feature. Remember, we're bringing attention to the features of the area around us, not only to build trust between you and the reader, but also because it's a fun way to explore the city, and so we want to be able to highlight all of the wonderful things in us that our city has to offer in our stories. So what type of action within the story allows people to observe the different things that you've brought them here to see? Now, does the location have an atmosphere that can be played on? Was it close enough to the last location? Because if the locations are too far apart, as we said, people only follow novelty so far. And if you are making them walk 3 kilometers between locations, people are very unlikely to complete that. And we know because we've tested it. In previous years, we've had branches of a story that may go 1 kilometer or may go 2 or 3 kilometers. And we found that after 1 kilometer, people exponentially dropped off as to how many people actually finished the narrative because they didn't want to have to walk that far. And then the final thing to consider is what sounds could be incorporated into the music to help bring the atmosphere of that location into life and merge it with the fiction that you have planned for that area. Story City hosts a whole range of location-based stories. And so while you may have many linear non-fiction stories like walking tours and food trails and following dancers through the streets or acrobatics, there are also the ability to be able to do interactive stories on the app, which includes things like puzzle trails and choose your own adventures. But the interesting thing about these stories is that they require a different set of skills to your normal straightforward story, because essentially with location you are inviting people to interact with your characters, with your story, with the area about them. And so that requires you to put a little bit of forethought into how you're going to structure your narrative so that if people do take splitting branches and don't see all of the locations like a regular walking tour would, how do you make sure that everything works together and that the person who takes pathway A has just as good an experience as the person who takes pathway B? So building interactive narrative structures can be harder than you think, particularly if you're writing those branching narratives, because when you allow your story to branch and allow the choice to become a factor in the story, then you actually have to think about multiple ways to end something. And after about the first 3, trust me, it can be a little bit of a drag. So as you can see, this was the first choose your own adventure that I ever wrote on the screen here. And in the end, it was the locations that ended up prompting all of the random 8 endings that I had for this particular story. And some of them were truly bizarre, and some of them were the first ones that I kind of came up with that seemed like the automatic ones, and then as you moved further and further out, you had to become more and more creative, to the point now that a lot of the times when I actually write my regular linear novels, I will go through this exercise so that all of the predictable endings kind of get moved out of the way, and I have to become more creative in how I end my novels so that I am not just stereotyping what it is that I write. So even if you're not writing a branching narrative, it is sometimes helpful to plan an experience in this way, because once you are done with all of the obvious endings, as I said, then you become more creative in your solutions. And in this way, you can pull together something surprising and discard the easier solutions for ones that are more interesting to your participant. These are the different types of branching narrative structures that we have seen at Story City. And as you can see, some of these are straightforward and others like to loop. But branching narratives aren't the only type of interactive structures. You can get much more linear structures like puzzle rooms, which are also interactive. So in a puzzle room, you must solve a series of clues to unlock boxes that will then allow you to unlock further puzzles. Sometimes you can solve puzzles at the same time. Sometimes you have to solve them one after the other. So there are many ways that you can make a linear story where you move from one place to the other with no branching narratives, but still you can make that interactive. So let's have a look at a couple of different ways that you can build interactivity into linear story projects. First off, clues are a great way to make a linear story interactive. Basically, you can give people clues that will either lead them to a particular answer or will indicate the next location that they need to go to continue their, I suppose, scavenger hunt in a way. So you use those clues to make the gameplay as challenging or not as you wish. Then you have things like puzzles, which need some sort of solving. So puzzles tend to be more than clues. They can be unlocking a particular type of geometric number combination, or they could be trivia, or even something as simple as multiple choice. And the idea is that it's supposed to move the gameplay forward. You must unlock the puzzle before you can then continue on with the narrative. Then you have things like games, so physical activities that you can get the participants to play with themselves, with each other, with the character. So you can use this to fill out a story with activities, or you can use it to get people to interact with their surroundings. Similar to games, you can get people to do challenges. So climbing to the top of a rock or a playground to fetch something, or knocking on or hugging trees, or saying a rhyme to lure out fairy creatures. It doesn't matter. The idea is that you are doing something as part of the gameplay. Then we have things like creation or leaving a legacy, where you essentially create something to play with or leave behind for other people to discover. It's used a lot in geocaching, if you think about it, both creation and finding a thing, where essentially you may not be doing this activity with everyone who's doing this activity, but when you come up and you find that someone has left a gift for you or made something for you, and seeing potentially if you put like a knock in a tree or a line on a rock, how many other people had been there before you. It's a great way to bridge that divide and connection with other gaming groups, but then to also make the story that you're a part of interactive. So you could be making things like bark boats or stickmen, or as I said, like leaving behind a notch on a rock, or a rock cairn that people make collectively together across many visits. Then you have things like finder things. So I tend to recommend these as a way to increase awareness. So we did this with the Creeks and Waterway Department, for example, who they wanted people to know more about their flora and fauna. So it provides an opportunity to get people to make a collection, which can be used maybe as a final unlocking mechanism for a story, or you could even use it as like a little way to branch the story without needing to create whole new characters and storylines as a result. You might get someone to build one thing over the other, for example. So all of these are different ways that you can build interactivity into those linear narratives. So using those types of interactivities and other techniques, you can do a whole bunch of different things with the app. For example, as we said, you can do split narratives where you have different branching narratives based on the choice that a participant makes. They'll end up in a different place to somebody else. You can also have a situation where you have two segments from different branches of your story end in the same location, but they have different stories based on where you went beforehand. We also allow things like multiple choice via linking to other internal app pages, so those multiple choice kind of quizzes. You can do things like impart extra information in kind of like an Easter egg or a rabbit hole scenario. So again, talking about the Creeks and Waterways Department that we worked with, they wanted people to know more about the flora and fauna. So in the activities or the narrative that we wrote about some bush creatures, they would highlight anytime they mentioned a particular animal or a particular type of plant, and then if you clicked on that, you would be taken to a page that would tell you something about those creatures or plants. You can also do things like not show the map to run clue trails. So you may give a clue as to what location they need to go to next to unlock the next bit. You can have the map turned off so that people have to literally find that location without the help of the map. And then when the next part of the story is triggered, you can choose to turn the map back on if you would like. So you have that ability to turn the map on only on the locations that you want, but they will still trigger if someone finds themselves to the right location next. And then we have the things like taking photographs and posting those to social media, those kind of photo post challenges. And at the moment, we can't verify that people are doing this before they move on. However, that is a feature that we're currently building into the next version of the app, so look out for that. Now, as with all of these interactive elements, we need to make sure that the locations are far enough apart for the whole experience to work. As much as I would love to say that we have complete control over the technology, there are so many different types of phones in the world, and each phone has its own inbuilt GPS system. And depending on how accurate that GPS system is, depends on how well this technology works. So what tends to happen is some phones will be accurate to 2 meters, whereas other phones won't guarantee accuracy under 200 meters, which up until really recently is something that was a problem with the iPhone. In fact, we had to completely reconfigure the app so that they would work on iPhone because the inbuilt GPS was so poor. So while companies are constantly updating and improving these kind of things, we still need to make sure that if we keep our locations far enough apart and not next to each other so that we accidentally trigger one on our way to the other, then that will create a much more engaging and problem-free experience for your participants when you create for the app. But we'll talk more about that in the technical section of the videos. But first, in our next video, we are going to talk about the tips and tricks for setting up and testing your locations on Google Maps so that you don't run into those technical issues.